Hello and welcome back to my favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I'm incredibly excited for today's video because I think it's going to save investors a lot of money over the next few weeks. Last week, we noticed that when everybody was euphoric and prices were rallying, the media outlets were only talking about Bitcoin's upcoming teleportation and how the spot Bitcoin ETF options were pricing in 176K per Bitcoin by end of year. And of course, whenever prices are rocketing, all of the asset managers start popping up out of nowhere and giving out their huge price targets. But then as soon as we see some very slight consolidation, the media completely flips and starts talking about how Bitcoin could drop 20% if it keeps following M2 money supply. But actually 20% is not scary enough, so maybe it's going to be a 30% correction in play before we're able to break above 100K per Bitcoin. And that makes everybody very fearful that maybe Bitcoin's price is going to crash again, even though it's hard to call a drop from 100K to 95K a crash. And I know a lot of people are looking this up because this is the most views I have ever seen on a Cointelegraph article. But if you zoom out, you'll notice there's nothing to worry about on the Bitcoin weekly chart. We just broke out of 8 months of reaccumulation and have rallied for only 3 weeks. So some healthy consolidation makes sense, but usually after breaking out of such a long consolidation, you would expect a rally for a lot longer than just 3 weeks, but there will be shakeouts and little consolidations along the way. And because of that weekly price structure and how long we consolidated, slowly grinding higher is still by far the most likely in my opinion. There can always be surprises that result in deeper pullbacks, but as of right now, I'm not seeing any reasons why that should be expected. And I definitely don't expect any huge shakeouts or the cycle being over based on current price structure and how much momentum Bitcoin has right now. And it's normal that when the market spends too much time in extreme greed and we see a huge buildup of leverage in the system, it makes sense for some of those leverage traders to get liquidated and for long-term holders that are up significantly on their positions to take some profits. And that results in newer people panic selling. And you can see this really clearly when you zoom out and look at the long-term holder realized profit, which is about $2 billion per day right now, which is essentially double what we saw in January of 2021. But when you adjust for the difference in Bitcoin's price, it's about the same amount of profit taking. It was about 40K per Bitcoin when they were profiting about $1 billion a day, and now Bitcoin is over 90,000 and they're profiting about 2 billion. And this can carry on for quite a while. It went on for almost 5 months during the last cycle. So it doesn't mean the top is imminent, but it does mean we're approaching the end game most likely. And we have probably a couple more months of mania and extreme excitement before the majority of the move is behind us. And this is why the short cycle scenario remains my base case, because we're seeing so much profit taking from long-term holders already. And we have seen this cycle operate ahead of schedule with an all-time high before the halving and now well into price discovery before we even enter the post-halving year. I have a hard time envisioning 12 more months of uptrend for Bitcoin. Of course, I would love to see that, and I will always keep some positions to take advantage of that. But my base case remains maybe 4 to 5 months of this rally continuing and an eventual alt season. But I think eventually this long-term holder selling and perhaps the macro backdrop weakening will result in a shortened cycle scenario. And the reason why I'm not worried about the top being in right now is we still have some very strong narratives for Bitcoin developing. I don't know if these narratives are actually going to play out, but they are bringing a ton of interest and FOMO into this market. We have Brazil's Congress weighing a Bitcoin reserve as a hedge against global risks. And even if they don't end up doing it, just the narrative in itself and the pressure it could put on other countries is an incredible narrative for this cycle. We also have companies all over the place putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet, even if it's small amounts of money, because they know that it brings their company a lot of interest and it gets their stock to pump. And this is one of those trends that can get a lot crazier before it finally dies out and stops working. So I'm sure a lot of small companies are considering this right now to try and bring attention to their business. It kind of reminds me of the .com bubble when companies would just put .com on the end of their name and their stock would rally because of all of the excitement surrounding the internet. And it does feel like something similar could be developing here. And I think it could get quite crazy if a lot of of companies start copying this playbook. We also have another trend being followed by companies, which is issuing convertible notes to buy Bitcoin, a playbook that was created by MicroStrategy. And again, this is one of those things that won't last forever. Eventually, it'll stop working, but it can get a lot crazier before that day actually happens, and it's a very strong narrative for this cycle. And of course, we have the SEC chair Gary Gensler getting ready to step down when Trump gets inaugurated on January 20th of 2025. This narrative is especially important for altcoins. We know that there has been a regulatory beatdown on this asset class for the past 4 years, so more regulatory clarity and more innovation is an incredibly bullish backdrop and narrative for this cycle. And when you have a bullish price structure combined with very strong narratives, we have to expect major volatility for Bitcoin in both directions. We've been enjoying an incredible rally this quarter so far, and usually a bullish November carries over into December, so we could see a nice rally going into the end of the year. But we have to keep our FOMO in check and be prepared for those pullbacks that always happen in bull markets along the way that shake out all of the weak hands and liquidate the investors that are way too leveraged. So the way I'm navigating this is by sticking to relatively safe spot holdings for now, which I'm very comfortable holding through drawdowns. I have been slowly taking profits on the way up and building this cash position to take advantage of altcoin opportunities once alt season can really kick off. And of course, I'll always cover whatever changes I make to my strategy or my portfolio in my weekly report. But it does feel like it's getting close to the time where Ethereum and other altcoins can start playing catch up to Bitcoin and Solana, who have been the leaders of this cycle. Our line in the sand where I would start getting very concerned for all of my positions would be Bitcoin closing a weekly candle back below 74,000. That would make me pretty convinced that the cycle top is in, but we are very far from that happening right now. And I think that many crypto natives are realizing that the upside for Bitcoin is quite limited at these prices. Maybe you can double your money over the next 12 months in a best case scenario. So I would expect a lot of Bitcoin profits to start rotating into Ethereum and smaller projects, which could have a lot more potential upside. We did see some very impressive price action from Ethereum this week as crypto whales start to rotate some of their Bitcoin profits to Ethereum. It's the first time we're closing above our range mid-level since going all the way back to July of this year. And of course, now that we have prices doing a little bit better, the narratives are starting to pop up out of nowhere. We're seeing the Ethereum ETFs beating the Bitcoin ETFs this week in inflows. We also see Ethereum L2s surpassing their record of 51 billion TVL. And we saw a big victory in the Tornado Cash case as the US Appeals Court said the Treasury overstepped when it sanctioned Tornado Cash, which is just a great narrative for deregulation and more DeFi innovation on Ethereum and other L1s. And speaking of other L1s, we saw a pretty decent sell-off on Solana this week after putting in a new Coinbase all-time high, but it is bouncing as of right now, and I do expect this one to continue performing quite well this cycle. Now, of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's also some macro risks as well. We've seen Bitcoin following global liquidity with a 2-month lag for almost the entirety of the cycle. Whenever global liquidity breaks higher, Bitcoin breaks higher 2 months later. Whenever global liquidity tops and starts going down, Bitcoin tops and starts going down 2 months later. And just recently in September, global liquidity topped and started going down. So 2 months from then would be November. So Bitcoin consolidating and chopping around below 100K would make sense to me. But the good news is we are seeing global liquidity turn higher recently, and we are seeing the dollar index get rejected off its risk off region as of right now. And again, this is very early signs that maybe it could be rolling over, and I would really like to see that if I am going to go out on the risk curve and start buying altcoins, but we do need to wait for 1 or 2 weekly closes to confirm this rejection at the risk off zone. And of course, the main driver of the dollar index is what the market is pricing in for the Federal Reserve. We did see the dollar index rally when the market was only pricing in 2 rate cuts over the next 12 months, but we did see a third one get added, and that resulted in the dollar index going down a little bit. But we do have that FOMC meeting just 20 days away, and that should have a huge impact on the expectations for the dollar index going forward. We're going to see the Fed's economic projections for next year, and we're also going to see what they're going to tell us in terms of QE and when they plan to perhaps at least stop quantitative tightening and reducing their balance sheet, and maybe even tell us when they're thinking about restarting QE. But I am expecting dollar weakness in 2025, which should be a very strong backdrop for Bitcoin and other risk assets. And we know that dollar weakness has been the catalyst for Bitcoin's huge mania phases. And if we could see the dollar index roll over sometime soon, that would be an incredible backdrop for Bitcoin, but an especially incredible backdrop for altcoins and alt season. And taking a look at traditional markets, we have the S&P 500 breaking into price discovery yet again, which is the backdrop we want to see for Bitcoin. If we want to see Bitcoin continue higher, the S&P 500 has to be doing well also. But as we look forward, we're still expecting government debt to continue increasing, which should result in an increase in the money supply as well as that debt gets monetized. And for those reasons, I remain bullish on risk assets like the S&P 500. And of course, I remain bullish on risk assets like Bitcoin. But there is always the possibility of pullbacks along the way, so we do have to remain open to multiple outcomes. But based on current price structure and how long we spent consolidating before this price discovery breakout, grinding higher for Bitcoin is still my base case. But anyway, let me know what you expect. What scenario do you think is most likely? As always, thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.